Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and morning, Kamal, right out there in United States. We had a 2 day of exciting sessions in this webinar on biodiversity, governance, management, and awareness on the occasion of the World Environment Day. Last 2 days have been very prolific, enriching discussions, but I'm also uh, greatly interested in today's topic. Today, the theme is biodiversity assessment and management, and we have an absolutely wide-ranging, diverse panel for today as well. We had someone who brings in about 6 decades of experience in biodiversity, evolutionary ecology, and conservation related aspects. And we have as young as who is building their careers or shaping their careers in biodiversity science. So we have absolute variety and depth of knowledge and experience, if I would say so. So without much ado, uh, we would kickstart today's session. Some house rules. We have a plenary or a keynote speaker, and please feel free, Kamal, to take 15 to 20 minutes. Then we have 3 short presentations from panelists of each about 8 to 10 minutes. And as it has been experienced in past 2 days, that it takes us about 60 minutes to go through this. So we are left with around 30 minutes for question answer session. While the speakers are speaking, please mute your microphones. Uh, if you have any questions, then put them in chat box or raise your hands simply if you are on a video, so we can see. I would do my duty today to introduce today's keynote speaker, but thereafter Dr. Aparna Watwe would take us through the rest of the session. It is with great pleasure and honor I introduce you today's keynote speaker, Professor Dr. Kamaljeet Bawa. Kamal, you don't look that you have just got into 80s. As young, an amazing energy of an 8-year-old sometimes. And when I meet you each time personally, face to face, you put in recharge our batteries. And that's not my experience. It's an experience of many who has been associated and working with you. Born in Punjab, Kamal holds the BS, MS, and PhD degree. Kamal has done his PhD in 1967 from Punjab University in Chandigarh. Then he moved on to United States of America. He was the fellow at the College of Forest Research at University of Washington. Then Kamal moved in 1974. You were also at Harvard University as a Cobalt Bullard Research Fellow. Then in 1974, you moved on to University of Massachusetts, Boston, as an assistant professor to distinguished professor. You have received the Gwenman Fellowship, and Kamal has been Pew Scholar, also the recipient of Lenin Medal, first Indian to receive the Lenin Medal, and Gunner's Award for Sustainability. And if I'm not wrong, you have just received Kalinga Award, if I'm correct.
Okay, go ahead.
Right. And then currently you are a distinguished professor at the University of Massachusetts, Boston. But most important for me is the foundation of biodiversity, conservation biodiversity, through public partnerships that you have set at as an in the form of Ashoka Trust for Research in Ecology and Environment. I have seen a tree growing, proliferating, and doing some outstanding piece of work in biodiversity, ecology, and environment. And I remember the day we met in Washington, D.C. at one of the uh, event that was just a month or two before I joined GBIF. Uh, and you put your hands on my shoulder, and I still have that brotherly touch of those hands and the blessings, which comes from having a brother who has three decades of experience. So I really have been counting, and it has been refreshing. And whenever I feel uh, frustrated, sometimes the one of the name that comes to my mind is Kamal Bawa. So, with this, the floor is yours, and take as much time as you would think is required and essential. Over to you, Kamal.
Thank you, Vishwas. You could have gone on, and I would have been happy with just 5 minutes. But thank you very much for that very generous introduction. And good evening, friends and colleagues. I'm just very delighted to be here, very honored to be here among this very distinguished set of colleagues. And I really appreciate this opportunity to talk about biodiversity. I was specifically asked to talk about assessment and management of biodiversity. It's a very, very broad area, each of these, assessment as well as management. And one can talk about it for several hours, several days, several weeks, several years. So I'll just pick up 2 or 3 points that are very relevant to the current situation in India under each of these topics. So first, let me talk about assessment. And I want to make 3 points. And those 3 points relate to very incomplete knowledge we have about biodiversity in India. Secondly, about the use of technology. And thirdly, the very serious institutional constraints we face in overcoming some of the barriers in our efforts to make really rapid progress in assessing biodiversity. We can, but we have some serious issues that can be very easily overcome, as I will propose. So my first point is about our very incomplete knowledge of biodiversity, very, very serious gaps about the amount of biodiversity we have. We really don't know. Take, for example, the issue at species level. We know globally there are about 12 million species of different organisms, plants and animals, excluding bacteria and viruses. And since India is assumed to have 8% of the global biodiversity, one would imagine that India has somewhere 800,000 to 1 million species of plants and animals. My estimate is that only 190,000 of these have been named. And this is an upper estimate. In reality, I don't think more than 150,000 have been named from India. So we have somewhere 650 to 800,000 species out there, but we don't know what these species are. We don't know where they might be found. Coming to flowering plants, and I can talk about flowering plants because I have dealt with flowering plants throughout my life. Estimates are that there are about 16,000 species of flowering plants in India. But I think the number might be in the range of 18,000 to 19,000 or even 20,000. Let me give you an example of orchids. We currently list about 1,200 species of orchids in India. The authenticated list have about 1,200 species. And we think that there are about 700 species that are in the Northeast. But if you look at Sikkim alone, there are about 500 species in Sikkim alone. So I think the number of species in Northeast is much more than 700. It could be easily 1,400, 1,500. In other words, there might be more species that are undescribed than they are described. This is the state of affairs for orchids. You cannot name a group of plants that is more spectacular, that is more significant than the orchids. So that is our state of knowledge. Now, the second point I wanted to make is about the use of technology. We have tools available to rapidly assess biodiversity. For example, we have drones, we have other tools, environmental DNA. We have digital tools for collation, organization, and dissemination of data. And this is very critical because if we do proper collation, organization, that can identify gaps not only what we need to know, what groups of organisms we need to look more deeply into, where we should look for those groups geographically, but we are not using the tools to the extent we can. And this is very ironic. India is a superpower in information technology, but we are nowhere in the world, in the global ranking, in the use of digital tools and data analytics to identify knowledge gaps in assessment. My third point relates to, for lack of a better term, institutional constraints, which are really very, very easy to overcome. But they act as serious obstacles in rapid assessment of biodiversity. First, we have very few biodiversity science specialists. And the very few we have, they face considerable hurdle in their work. There are institutional constraints. This institution cannot do this. That institution cannot. Only this particular institution has a mandate to do this and that, and we go on and on. Yesterday, I had another webinar on biodiversity. And the first question, and these were young people, undergraduates, graduate students. The first question somebody asked me in the audience was, what about delays in getting permits for fieldwork? And I'm sure there are a number of people in the audience who have faced this difficulty. I think it was about 55 years ago when I started my fieldwork in the Northeast India as a young graduate student, exploring biodiversity. I would simply walk into the office of a divisional forest officer and tell the officer what I was doing, where I needed to go to collect plants. The officer, just our first meeting, will pick up the phone, call his junior, tell him that so-and-so is coming in the area. Please let him stay in the forest guest house. I was just a graduate student, and offer him any assistance he may need. Try to do that today. There was not that an urgent need to assess biodiversity at that time, but now it is. So I was very happy to hear, I think on the first day, that there are amendments to the National Biodiversity Act that are being considered. But I think mostly for the domestic researchers, the National Biodiversity Act is not that much of a problem. I think the problem is at the state level, and it is not clear to me why at the state levels, the researchers, the students, and scientists, they are not considered as allies. We have a common goal. We have a common goal to assess our biodiversity. And why it is that we cannot really work together, and why bureaucrats who are in a position to facilitate the process become major obstacles to the progress. I'm not making a blanket statement. They're very, very fine people. They're very courteous, generous people. We have met them. They do everything to help us. And I think we are very appreciative of that help and that cooperation. But I think the point here is we can make, by taking very, very simple measures, we can make very, very rapid progress. So in terms of the assessment, I wanted to make 3 points to summarize. There are very serious gaps in our knowledge. We can use technology more efficiently, and some of the institutional constraints, and that was the last third point, I think can be overcome very, very easily. And I'll talk about solutions a little bit later too. Now let me come to the management. And again, I want to make 3 points. And first is about monitoring. We cannot manage biodiversity unless we monitor ecosystems, unless we monitor landscapes and biodiversity at all levels. India is one of the few large countries that has no systematic monitoring program. Let me qualify. We are all very aware of the very fine work done by the Forest Survey of India in terms of mapping biodiversity, in terms of inventories too. Very useful work, very good analysis. But that is not monitoring of biodiversity in a very systematic manner. And even in terms of the mapping, we have made very little progress during the last 10 years. We can define the areas under forests, but no more. In what state these forests are, what is the composition of these forests. Great strides are being made, again, using technology to get into very, very intensive monitoring. So technology can help here, and we need to move very, very quickly. I know there is a monitoring program in place. I think it was about 10 years ago. I suggested to the then Minister of Environment and Forest about the need for a serious monitoring program. I got a very good response within a day. And then Professor Sukumar and I put together a note about a monitoring program. About 5 or 6 years ago in the Paris Accord, the current minister announced that program. And I know the steps are being taken. But again, that program needs to be initiated very, very quickly. And furthermore, expanded considerably. The second point I wanted to make about management was about restoration. Vishwas, how I am doing about in terms of time? I'll need just 3-4 minutes. Hello? Anybody?
Sir, it's fine. You can continue.
Okay. The second point I wanted to talk about was restoration. First, I want to dispel this myth that is very, very widespread in India, that we can destroy forests somewhere and create these forest ecosystems elsewhere. I have no idea on which planet this thinking has come around. But let's move on. I think we all recognize there is a very urgent need to reforest degraded lands. There is an urgent need to fulfill our obligations under the Paris Accords, to expand the forest area by several million hectares almost every year. And we need to move beyond planting trees in creating forest ecosystems or other ecosystems. A stand of trees of a given species or even few species does not constitute an ecosystem that we want to restore. We need to integrate restoration with livelihoods in order to have local ownership in restoration efforts. And this brings me to the third point, and that is democratizing forest management. Again, I think the same point I discussed under institutional controls in assessment too, democratizing assessment, involving a number of people, not only scientists, but also citizens. And I think this point will also come up when we talk about people's biodiversity registers a little bit later. So we talk about people's biodiversity registers, but the concept is silent about their role in management of overall local biodiversity and ecosystem services in places where these communities are embedded. And we will make much rapid progress if we look at assessment through people's biodiversity registers, along with the management, co-management of the landscapes. So let me briefly talk about solutions. I just didn't want to merely talk about problems, though for each of the 3 points I made under assessment and management, I have proposed solutions. But the solution is in terms of strengthening biodiversity science, in strengthening applications of technology, and it might not merely tools, but also analytics, data analytics. And the third is enhanced participation of civil society. All these solutions, we have incorporated into this national mission on biodiversity and human well-being. Dr. Mathur made a reference to the national mission. Day before yesterday, this is an idea, this is a concept that was formulated almost a year and a half ago by a Bangalore-based group that I have brought together with Dr. Mathur participating very actively from Dehradun. And this idea, the concept was discussed by the Prime Minister's Science, Technology, Innovation Advisory Council last October, and not last October, October 2018, was approved by the council in the next month. A seed grant was made to the Biodiversity Collaborative to start developing a roadmap for the mission, for implementing the project. The nodal agency is National Biodiversity Authority. And I think the mission itself, the beginnings of the mission, demonstrates, I think, the collective will of people to prevail in terms of collaboration and partnerships. I think a point Dr. Mathur also emphasized in the beginning. So I see this movement, and I'm very encouraged by this movement of people coming together and really, in a very determined manner, exercising their collective will and really putting their faith in collaboration and partnerships, the only way we can move forward. Thank you very much. And I'll have a few things to say later if there is time.
Thank you, Dr. Bawa. And it was very, very wonderful to hear your thoughts. Vishwas sir, would you like to say something? Your mic is off.
Okay. Kamal, it was something that we needed to hear. Those three concerns that you talked about in terms of assessment as well as in terms of management are something that we need to harp around for time and again. I just wanted to ask you, for the benefit of the larger audience, if you could elaborate a little bit about different work programs in NBM as it is proposed, especially because the young people are around on the call.
Yeah, the national mission has 7 components. And I think the centerpiece of that component is cataloging and mapping life of India, which is also, we can call the Indian version of that name is Nisarg Bharat. And I think Vishwas can correct me, which in turn has 3 subcomponents: exploration of biodiversity in the field. The second component is people's biodiversity registers. And the third component is to develop this common platform which will collate, organize, and disseminate all the biodiversity data, which will be interoperable and which will be, there would be scores of partners in creating and using that platform. And that platform will also serve as a place where the data will flow from the other 6 components. So the other 6 components are biodiversity and health, one health concept, which is very relevant today, biodiversity and agriculture, biodiversity and ecosystem services, biodiversity and climate change, biodiversity and bioeconomy, and a component, a very, very strong component in terms of strengthening India's capacity in biodiversity science by creating a series of fellowships, by making very large institutional grants to universities, academia, or other organizations to strengthen their biodiversity programs, engaging thousands of, I would say millions of students, and literally millions, thousands, I would say, if not millions of citizens. So it's a very comprehensive program. The budget is, I would say, many 100 crores per year, the proposed budget. And most of that budget, I think more than half of the budget will go in the form of grants to individuals and organizations who will submit proposals within the framework defined by the mission in all these relevant areas. So we are very excited about that. The work is in progress.
Sir, I think Dr. Bawa's microphone is off.
Yeah, I believe that is happening. Kamal, your microphone is muted for some reason. Kamal, your microphone.
I have no idea. I'm sorry. You know, we didn't hear me at all, right?
I think we heard you up to the all themes within the NGM, and then in the last about 1 minute we didn't hear you.
Yeah, I think the point is, I think the last point I was making was that more than 50% of the money will be spent in the form of grants to individuals and institutions under this mission. So almost everybody will have opportunity to participate in the work that is defined by the mission. There will be very large teams working on specific themes. For example, biodiversity and agriculture, I think they have defined the program that there would be 50 or 60 institutions participating in the core activities. And then there would be grants made by that program that would again involve probably another 30 or 40 institutions. That is just one component. So each component probably will involve individuals from scores and scores of institutions.
Aparna?
So thank you, Dr. Bawa. It is really very, very important to hear from you about National Biodiversity Mission. And I hope we can go into more details in the question and answer session also. Now I would like to go over to our next speaker, Dr. Jitendra Gaikwad. He has been with us from the day one. To introduce to him, it's not possible to do it in 1 minute or so, but I will still try my best. Dr. Jitendra has completed his PhD degree from Macquarie University in Australia, and at present he is working as the head of the Biodiversity Informatics Unit in the German Center for Integrative Biodiversity Research, IDIV, in Germany. Through IDIV, he has been championing open science and supporting scientists in scientific data management. His work has been in the field of data strategy, data architecture, governance, and he has dealt with very complex ethnobiological data, which was also part of his PhD and work later on. It is data about information that is held by the indigenous communities, by the traditional communities about biodiversity. So I would say the entire knowledge, biodiversity knowledge of the humanity, he has dealt with such complex data set. He has also been involved in the application of novel computational techniques for biodiversity research. He has experience in data policies, data standards, and stakeholder management. He has been writing prolifically. He has written papers, scientific papers. He has also written with Dr. Vinod Mathur and Dr. Vishwas Chavan. He has authored about National Biodiversity Information Outlook for India. That was released in 2012. He has done a lot of very interesting research and gets inputs from different parts of the world where he has studied and he has published. So over to you, Dr. Jitendra.
Oh, thank you, Aparna, for this generous introduction. And I would like to start by saying that I wish you all a very happy World Environment Day. And I would also like to thank upfront the organizers, Aparna, Dr. Chavan, and Amit for inviting me for this talk. So to begin with, I would like to share my screen to give my presentation for this talk. So give me a couple of seconds, I will do that. Okay, so are you able to see this? Are you able to see my screen?
Yes, Jitendra, sir.
Okay, great. We heard Professor Kamal Bawa talking about technology and indicating that Indians are not that well set or prepared for using information technology for biodiversity conservation, to which I more or less agree. And there are certain reasons as well for that. But what I'm going to talk today is about the most basic and neglected aspect of biodiversity associated activities, such as management and assessment. And that component is efficient management of biodiversity data. Through this talk, I would also like to emphasize why India must adopt biodiversity data management as part of its scientific lifestyle and national heritage activities. So to ensure biodiversity-based economy exists in reality before the Indian biodiversity is lost or is extinct. So to get the message across, I'm going to take support of an incident from the epic story Ramayana. As we all know, somewhere near the southern tip of India during the battle with Ravana, Lakshmana, the brother of Rama, gets injured and is unconscious. The traditional medicine doctor comes and tells that you need a herb called Sanjeevani for reviving Lakshmana, which is found somewhere in Himalaya. So you have that spatial distance there from north to south. Rama asks Hanumana to immediately go to Himalaya, get the medicinal herb. And as order, Hanumana goes to Himalaya and is not able to find the herb actually. So what he does is just pick up the whole mountain and bring it back. The traditional medicine doctor find the herb and use it to save Lakshmana's life. So that's the story in the Ramayana. But now just imagine a situation where if at that time information technology was available, the traditional medicine doctor would have simply looked on the biodiversity data platform, find the exact location of the herb, hand over the spatial coordinates of that herb and hand it over to Hanumana, and Hanumana could quickly find it and get it back ASAP to him. Just imagine how much effort could be saved there. Also, the displacement of the mountain with its biodiversity could also be avoided. So today in the 21st century, we still have the same problem, but instead of Hanuman, we have biodiversity researchers, conservation managers, policymakers, indigenous communities, citizens, and many other stakeholders without easy access to reliable, credible, and relevant biodiversity data and information. Apparently, this is in spite of the fact that there is a lot of data and information produced on biodiversity. Some say there is a deluge of data, but then why are we faced with a situation where pertinent data and information on biodiversity is not easily accessible and also usable? So let's look at some of the reasons. So as you can see here, biodiversity data itself is highly heterogeneous and it's available in different digital and non-digital formats. It ranges from molecular level to the global level and also across different timestamps, different time scales. So as you can see here, there's data coming from satellite or sensors or on field, from field. So there is a lot of heterogeneity in data and data collection efforts. Apart from high diversity of biodiversity data, the other challenge are that the data is highly fragmented or distributed. So it's not like we have consolidated place where you have everything in one place, but it's really fragmented in bits and pieces. Findability of relevant data is a big bottleneck, which leads to inaccessibility to relevant data and information. Further, the situation gets more complicated due to the diversity of the softwares or application, informatics applications that are used for generating data and the formats in which it is stored. So there is no connection, there is no talking to each other, there is no interoperability to say. So even if you find the data, it is likely that it will be difficult to use or it will be of limited use or it's really unusable. To avoid that, the frustrating situation, what is required is at the very foundational level is efficient management of biodiversity data and information. So for example, in a survey-based study by Springer Nature, they found that the scientists do not have good skills to organize the data which is presentable in a useful way. Most of the time, they do not have time to deposit data in relevant data repositories, and if at all they provide, it is mainly submitted as a supplementary file, which are of limited use since there is no associated information available to understand that data. Unfortunately, in spite of such a critical importance, data management is the most neglected aspect of biodiversity associated activities, especially in academics. Many researchers lack data management skills and some think of it as a burden while conducting scientific activities. Also, there are limited or no incentives for doing proper data management. So in the global assessment report of biodiversity and ecosystem services, it is indicated that there are data and knowledge gaps associated with various aspects of biodiversity, and as a result, certain assessment could not be done or are inconclusive, which also means your assessment and management of biodiversity is as good as the data at hand. So from the policy perspective also, it is important that researchers manage biodiversity data properly and make it available and usable for developing policies. So in the Indian context, coming to India, we are one of the mega biodiverse country and also an emerging economy. As we all see, there is a lot of pressure on the bioresources and there is a growing demand from the decision makers or from people for usable biodiversity data, that too relevant biodiversity data. We also know biodiversity is a cornerstone of our socio-economic progress, and access to that pertinent data and information is crucial to ensure that biodiversity-based economy exists in reality before biodiversity gets extinct. But now this is the background, but then how we proceed from here. So we can start with very simple steps, such as writing good documentation or information about the collected data, which enables even a person outside your domain to understand what the data is about. why it was collected and for what purpose, followed by the use of biodiversity data standards for making the data interoperable and human and machine readable. So it's not only interoperable, but it's not only the humans should be able to read it, but also the machine should also be able to read it, so that you can do some kind of processing or automatization processes. Then I would also recommend following data governance guiding principles such as FAIR, which is findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable, and CARE. So CARE is something like collective benefits, authority to control, responsibility, and ethics, and basically it deals with the indigenous data in this context. Along with this, to take forward, what is also needed are interoperable digital information infrastructure, and probably this is something that we would be talking later on during the interactions, and a lot of incentives for proper data management. So in a nutshell, what it means is that biodiversity data management should become an integral part of scientific lifestyle and national heritage activities. And I say so because efficiently managing biodiversity data is much more easier than moving the mountains. Thank you very much for listening, and I look forward to questions and interesting discussions later on.
Thank you so much, Jitendra. And it really has put the entire biodiversity informatics in India in a context. I hope we can discuss more on this. The next speaker is Dr. Amit Setiya. His organization is one of the hosts of this webinar series, and I would like to introduce him as one of the really active field workers, very passionate about biodiversity. He and his organization have been working in one of the most difficult terrains in the Vidarbha region. And it is only his passion for forest biodiversity and the knowledge of the people and conservation of it, which is making him do this over and over the years. He has a PhD in botany from Gondwana University, and his PhD was in ethnobotany and conservation. He has himself been a barefoot biodiversity worker, as he describes it. Parataxonomy is one of his major interests. He has been inspired by Professor Madhav Gadgir and his work related to people and governance of forest and governance of biodiversity. And he's committed to people's participation in the biodiversity resource management. He has been communicating with us in many ways. He writes articles, popular science articles, he writes research papers, and at the same time, he brings very raw information from the ground. I think that is very, very important for us, because sometimes we really will miss out on important things which only a tribal community would know, just because they are watching it every single day. They have information from biodiversity which is hardly ever accessible to a scientist. So his is a voice from a ground that a policymaker must hear in present situation. Conservation Research and Nature Education Society, CRANES, has been working in the People's Biodiversity Register field. They have actively taken up biodiversity register documentation in many villages. They are also involved in activities of community-based forest management, and in many ways they are bringing in the information from a very remote area. I request Dr. Amit Setiya to give us his talk.
Good evening all, and thank you, madam, for the introduction. Right, am I audible? Am I audible?
Yes, absolutely.
Yes, so after the legendary personality Dr. Bawa and dynamic presentation of Dr. Jitendra Gaikwad, I felt myself like pressed in between. So, but anyway, it is a biodiversity, and this is my niche where I'm going to present now. So give me a second. I'll start my presentation sharing. Uh, okay. So can you see the presentation slide?
Yes, we can see that.
Okay. So I'm going to talk about the People's Biodiversity Register in India and the journey so far. So I think the People's Biodiversity Register has started with the after the regulation of Indian Biodiversity Act 2002 with objectives to conserve conservation of the biodiversity, its sustainable use, and fair and equitable sharing of the benefit. And with this, a new revolution has begun. And still, India is the pioneer country to prepare the local level database of the biodiversity in the form of this PBR. And as the name indicates, it's a People's Biodiversity Register. So, from my point of view or the local point of view, it's data by the people and for the people. So, this document helps the local community in getting a clear information about their bioresource wealth and further it is ultimately the PBR is the very effective medium to access the biodiversity, and rather than the product PBR, the process is important where local people are actually bring into the process of knowing what they have, and secondly, the sense of belonging over their bioresources. But here comes a blast after means before a couple of months, an NGT order was released to the state stating that they should prepare their all people's biodiversity register by 31st of January 2020. And here the state administration was awake and hurriedly paid attention to this issue. This order has a bright side in other way. This order has brought everybody's attention to create an unprecedented note in everyone's mind. Uh, so going further, I'm going to present some best of the scenes of PBR. In spite of the Soul India is preparing a PBR, we already have some of the best practices as an example. So I'm going to present it one by one, not here. So we have a great people's initiative from a northeast village, Fali. Here, a group of young enthusiasts come forward to document their biodiversity, and in the short time, they prepared an observatory station for their biodiversity. As rightly Mr. Bawa said, Northeast holds a house for uh, hundreds of species of orchids, and in this presentation, in this website screenshot, we can see numerous orchids. So they are doing the great job. Then we have an example from Goa. There is an river island which is encircled by the Mandodevi River, a place called as Divar, and a 24-year young biologist chairing the BMC, Hyacinta Aguar. She has taken an excellent initiative in documenting the knowledge where she lives, surrounding her environment, every bird, plant, and in whatsoever manner she can contribute. She is doing great, and this is an example for us. And then our own state, Maharashtra. So Maharashtra is very progressive states in India, and it has been in the effective implementation of the Biodiversity Act with 21,000 plus PBRs in the process, and they claim that they are in the first stage or some of them are completed. But anyway, that process is rigorously monitored by the State Biodiversity Board, and they are very curious about the proper data collection. Uh, and in the previous slide, I would like to request, the place where I work is Gadchiroli. It is the easternmost district of Maharashtra state, and 70% of the land is occupied by forest and the tribal communities. Where I work in two law implementation. The first is the BD Act, and second is the CFR. And here we have came across a great experience where last year I have given a project from ZIZ, where I have to work with 5 pilot BMCs in Gadchiroli district, where we have to do the access and benefit sharing good practices. Here, in the first time in India, I think we have succeeded to implement the levy fee structure. So levy fee is the local tax where the local people can add a local tax over their bioresources. So along with the regular trade value, this is an additional income to the Biodiversity Management Committee. We have got. And I have an excellent example to share with you. Now there is a village called as Chicholi. And I tell you what is special about this is this BMC is solely governed by the women. Now from starting from the Gram Sevak to the normal member, everyone else is a woman. And these women are so generous, so curious, and so ready to take the help from the people like us. And here continually we have worked for the first 3 months were troublesome for us to make them convince about their bioresources trade and all these biodiversity and PBR thing. But anyhow, we were very successful in convincing them. And here I can give you one example. The plant in the right corner is Trichosanthus cucumeriana. This plant is basically a climber weed found everywhere in the village, and this is of no use to the local people. And then we found a trader who needs it. Locally, this plant is called Padora, and Sanskrit it is called as Patol Patra. This plant is basically an Ayurvedic substitute to many important drugs. So we have sold this plant at a rate of 50 rupees per kg. So these women got a handsome revenue out of the trade of this plant, plus 5% levy fee to go on. So this is a very important and a key lesson we have learned from this Chicholi BMC. Then we have Kerala State Biodiversity Board. Kerala is doing fantastic work in terms of all the PBR and Biodiversity Management Committee and the data management also. Then there are Uttarakhand. Some states of Northeast and Chhattisgarh are also making a good attempt in making the PBRs. Now, about this means behind this brighter side is a darker side of the PBR series. Right, this is, I can say, the post-NGT phase. The post-NGT phase where all the administrations are forced to complete their PBR in hurry and all that rushy manner. Here, the real questions arises whether it is a real people's one or a Gram Sevak one. The Gram Sevak is a key person in terms of the administration, who is a member of that BMC also, and who is a nominated or the answerable authority to government also. So Gram Sevak is always been in a pinch. So what I have observed in last couple of months, these Gram Sevak have themselves made the People's Biodiversity registers and submitted to the government before the deadline comes. So this is one of the darkest side we have seen. We need to check it out in the future. And similarly, the urban biodiversity, as yesterday we have taught, urban biodiversity is one of the neglected patch, and already we have discussed it yesterday, so I'm not going to talk on that. So, and finally, the digitization of the database is one of the most important thing we need to do. Right now, whatever the PBR are prepared, whatever the data we have got, it is all on the paper. and it is not in the soft copies. One can say yes, we have the soft copies, but these soft copies are of no use because different people have created this database in different applications, and compiling these could be a mess for anybody. So I think these are the darker side. Then coming to the end, I would like to give message to the three stakeholders of this. The NBA, I would like to request NBA to put more funds as per my experience. When a local person come to share his knowledge with me, basically he need to have a daily wages. So whenever he comes to me or spends a day with me, I am getting paid from my organization or somehow, but he is not getting paid in terms of anything. For whatever the data he is sharing, whatever the time he is giving, he is not getting anything. So there I think the fund is needed, and some more funds to be needed on the research side. As a day before yesterday, Aparna madam has raised the question of giving the local conservation funds. So this is one thing. Then promote the research work regarding biodiversity from different universities and schools and colleges. They can promote the research work where young blood can be brought into the picture. Then a skilled manpower requirement is the futuristic requirement we need. And then there should be a synergize between national research organizations like BSI, ZSI, FSI. These national organizations should brought into the one picture, and a proper structural organization can be made. Then to the State Biodiversity Board, I would like to suggest that there should be an independent structure. What we see now, and in most of the State Biodiversity Board are strongly associated with Forest Department. So here their regular structure is going on, but we need a dynamic approach to this biodiversity thing. So we need an independent structure, and that should be above the Forest Department. So this is what I think. And then should have a coordination with other line department like agricultural, horticulture, animal husbandry, fisheries, and the Jilla Parishad, and even the education department also. And then there should be a state board should play an important role in fetching the trader to the BMC, manufacturers to the BMC, so that they would know where their bioresources is, and BMC would get a ready-made buyer for them. And finally, and very importantly, a technical support group is very important. Now here, I would like to give an example of Lekha Menda. Menda Lekha is a village who has got the first Forest Rights Act in India. Here I was working with Dr. Madhav Gadgil, my PhD supervisor, Mr. Nitin Dongarwar, and co-supervisor Narkhede Madam. And then I brought into the picture of listing the evaluation of their PBR. So when I joined the group, it was 172 plant species only in the record. And when I started working, and after 3 years, of course, with people's participation, that list went up to 450 plus plants. So this indicates that these plants were there, but the local people were not having idea, or these plants were of no use to them in other way. So this is what a technical support group has a major role to play with. And the science literate inhabit.
Just sorry
Hello?
to interrupt, but can you just trying to remind you about a time? Just one moment.
Just a last slide.
Sure.
This is the second last slide I'm showing.
Sure, sir.
And then we need some science literate inhabitants to come forward and contribute in the local level preparation of this People's Biodiversity Register. And we need a technically sound and dedicated NGO to play a vital role. And before leaving, I would like to share some important lesson which I have learned and which I want some people to take home, that there is a need of more awareness creation, which is very important for the biodiversity and ecosystem services about means the people should know what the biodiversity and what these ecosystem services are paying them. And then effective implementation of the BED Act. This is from the biodiversity state board's point of perspective. And digitization of the data is very important. In whatso manner a technical agency is helping the local community, the data should be digitized. And then lastly, a BMC needs a catalyst. Right now, I can 100% sure, I'm 100% sure that we at Gadchiroli, we are the catalyst who brought out this picture and who brought out this information and knowledge out of the local people. If we wouldn't have gone there, I don't think the data could have come out. So these catalysts are needed. So I thank you all for patience listening, and I thank Dr. Vishwas, Aparna madam and Jitendra sir for their coordination. Thank you all.
Thank you, Dr. Amit. Actually, every session, every talk in this session probably would require much more discussion and thinking, and hope we all can do this in much more depth later on also. But because of constraints of time, I am trying to, ask everybody to keep to the time. So our last speaker, our final talk, or Bharat Vakya as we call it, is by Dr. Vishwas Chavan. He's also the host and organizer for this webinar series on biodiversity. I will not go into the cliched words that he needs no introduction. Actually, I requested him to give me a full session just to introduce him alone and his journeys and paths of exploring different disciplines, science, spirituality. I'm sure that they will be very illuminating to us. In the field of biodiversity informatics, he has been a visionary, a pioneer, and many of the things that he discussed in the last century, we are now readily accepting them 20 years later almost. Many of his ideas were too far ahead of time, and only now we have the technology and the acceptance from the society to bring them into reality. His school is of school of inspirational living. He's very inspiring person, as everybody must have interacted with him at some point or other. He's a science diplomat, a philosopher. I find him as an activator. He exudes positive energy, and let's listen to him. Sir, Bharat Vakya from you.
Thank you, Aparna. This is probably the best introduction I ever had, and the introduction to come from a daughter, amazing. I mean, that's the kind of emotions at this moment. So thank you very much. And today has been special. I mean, with presence of Kamal, and Kamal sharing his views and thoughts so freely, which he always does, but also very succinctly. Kamal, you talked about 3 problems in assessment, 3 problems in management of biodiversity, and then you offered 3 solutions. And then Jitendra elucidated your points with some of the challenges that we are facing in biodiversity informatics. And then Amit took it to a field level with real problems of some sort of blockages to have people's participation in the biodiversity monitoring and inventory programs. And therefore, I thought we should look at what is really happening at the state level. We are a country built up of the states, and these states are working partly in isolation. If you look at the history of biodiversity research, until we had the Biological Diversity Act, because Biological Diversity Act for the first time gave a structure in the form of National Biodiversity Authority and the State's Biodiversity Board. In past few years, I had an opportunity to look at the state biodiversity boards, their functioning, and what do we really need to do empower biodiversity assessment and management at in a federated structure as we are. So I had looked at the returns on investment in this whole infrastructure of MBA and SBBs and PMCs at the village level. Unfortunately, to say so, the returns on investment has not been great. That is something becoming discouraging, something that we need to pick up. It is important that we have to develop, we have to progress, but the question comes, is our development inclusive of conservation? Or from the COVID pandemic, I learned that the conservation needs to be prioritized and conservation should be inclusive of development. So what is the role then it brings on all these paradigm to the state biodiversity boards? To me, state biodiversity boards needs to be thought leader. They need to be initiators. They need to advance the implementation of biodiversity monitoring and assessment as well as its conservation. They need to play a vital role in becoming people-centric and bringing in people-centric activities. So on this backdrop, I'm going to offer the Pancha Sutras for the state biodiversity boards. What should the state biodiversity boards must be doing? The 5 sutras that I wish to offer, the first one of them is strengthening the governance and regulatory mechanism of the SBBs. You elucidated absolutely about the institutional constraint, the slowness of approval processes, lack of understanding of the needs of the researchers or even of the commercial entities and the local citizens. So we need to embark on e-governance. Data has to be a primary currency that on which the state biodiversity board's richness needs to be calculated. Many of the boards, even though they are on one side stringent in regulations, there is very loose and lethargy in terms of bio-customs and biosecurity regime, anti-trafficking measures in terms of bioresources and trafficking. ABS mechanisms are quite weak. Biosafety protocols need to be brought in place, and something that, as we have learned from the COVID pandemic, we would have to include biosafety protocols, biosecurity protocols, even at a BMC level. The second sutra that I wish to offer is maintaining and consolidating biodiversity conservation networks. We have isolated pockets of biodiversity researchers, surveyors, and conservationists. Conservationists are often looked at folks who probably do not have anything else to do. And I think that thought process needs to change. We need to have biodiversity ambassadors as the coordinators of biodiversity related assessment, management, and conservation activities, if not at a village level, but definitely at the district levels. So in Maharashtra, I did suggest to appoint them as the Jaiva Vividhata Doot, as biodiversity conservator, biodiversity ambassadors. The network of the technical supports groups, Amit in his last slide talked about messages to technical support group. I think the lack of having technical supports group available to the BMC level is definitely hindering the quality of the data, authenticity of the data, and the identification of the proper resources. E-catalogs of experts, I mean, simple step to begin. Every state must know who are the biodiversity researchers, managers, conservators, administrators in that particular given state. And I think this is something simply can be done without any much investment. And then biodiversity boards needs to collaborate. Each state has state-funded universities, centrally funded universities, private universities, research institutions, and unfortunately, the linkages of the board with these are very loose, practically none in many places. There are research institutions in the given state, and I think those collaborations need to be consolidated. More needs to be initiated. The third sutra that I wish to offer is contributions towards Nisarg. And as you rightly elucidated, Kamal, Nisarg stands for National Initiative for Sustained Assessment of Bioresources Governance. So definitely, Amit, you talked about PBR and PBR challenges. PBR needs to move to ePBR framework, which NBA is proactively working about. Also, biodiversity information outlook should not be only limited at national level, but needs to be brought in at a state level or at a union territory level. The information infrastructure, Jitendra, you highlighted the need. I wouldn't go much into it, but I definitely feel there needs to be a more coordinated citizens observations network. And these networks need to be given some sort of status or some sort of affiliations, I would say, rather than keeping them hanging loose, so that they can work more proactively and engage with the authorities in much better way. From the economics point of view, whether we are really receiving return on investment or not, I'm kicking up a concept of a biodiversity value and utility index. If we have a biodiversity value and utility index calculated at the BMC level, that will help us to have a district level index. District level index will help to have a state level index, and this is something that within the range and within the ambit or given a jurisdiction of the state biodiversity boards, and therefore we can cumulatively then have a national biodiversity value and utility index. We don't have seed banks at the state level. Specimens repositories are not well maintained. There is practically no bioresource utilization policy that can work efficiently. And these issues are different at different states. You know, the constraints are different. What do we therefore need is in each state a center for excellence in biodiversity conservation and sustainable development. Again, this need not be an institution in itself. It could be a virtual group that works consistently and continually. My last two sutras, the fourth one is the network of local biodiversity heritage site. We have UNESCO biodiversity heritage sites. We need the national and the state biodiversity heritage site, which is very well spelled in the biodiversity rules. But local communities must come forward to conserve existing groups, such as sacred groves and sacred ponds, but also announce the ecosystem, specialized ecosystem as their local biodiversity heritage sites. And furthermore, tapping on what Ashish Nerlekar was talking yesterday, that the Ferguson College of 1970 and of 2020, we need to nurture new age sacred groves. We need to create these islands of ecosystems and create a buffer zone to actually build a mala or a ring of these biodiversity heritage sites. And my last point is that the state must become biodiversity conscious. So the awareness, the capacity building, the training programs, the promotion. So the fifth sutra is biodiversity conscious state. And this is something very well within the ambit of the state biodiversity boards. How do we do this? Because the chairmen of the biodiversity boards are there for 3 years. The secretaries spent about 3 to 5 years, member secretary, no staffing. I think the first and the foremost start to that is a 10-year vision plan or action plan for the state biodiversity. And that is how I believe we would be able to achieve the principle or the sutra, Sanskrit shloka of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. So those are my 5 points. I believe that it is possible to achieve this. Kamal would elucidate that there were many challenges in his own lifetime, and he has seen a lot of good things happening in spite of those challenges, and so do many of us on this conference. I am currently writing a book on spiritual laws of biodiversity conservation, and in my conclusion, I would share 2 of the 10 principles, spiritual principles. And the first and the foremost principle is law of cosmic awareness. Everything that you want to know already exists on the cosmos. So be humble as a biodiversity researcher, be humble as biodiversity administrators and as biodiversity managers, and definitely be humble as the utilizers of the biodiversity resources. But my second sutra is law of pure potentiality. And it simply means that what we can collectively dream, consciously dream, we shall be able to achieve. So on this set of challenges, there are great times now. I think every situation, every pandemic turns society's outlook towards nature differently. And I believe this will also do so. So the future looks challenging, yet it is promising and bright. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. Again, as usual, very energizing talk. And just sitting here, I was wondering, how from Dr. Bawa's talk giving a global view, a scientific view, the technology coming in, and Dr. Amit talking about the experiences from the ground, how are we going to link all this? And you answered that. I think we find a soul in all these activities, which is already united as you see it, because there is a link, natural link between all of us. And we just have to explore that. And that's truly the Indian or Asian way in which we see things. Today's session is going to go on and on. I have Dr. Vivek Yenarwar who has asked a question. Sir, would you like to ask it live to Dr. Bawa?
Hello, Dr. Bawa, sir. I am really impressed whatever discussed by Dr. Vishwas, sir. I work with Biodiversity State Biodiversity Board, Maharashtra State Biodiversity Board, last 7 years. I handle various ABS cases, so I know the what are the loophole and challenges for implementing the Biodiversity Act in the state. And Dr. Vishwas sir rightly pointed out, and if Panchasutra Panchasutra implemented in the state for the various objective of the Biodiversity Board, so there is a Biodiversity Board will come on the right track, so that whatever the your ideas for the implementation of the Biodiversity Act will be in real. However, I will ask one question to Dr. Bawa sir. What are the various indicator for the good governance as far as State Biodiversity Board is concerned? Thank you, sir.
I think that question is partly addressed by Vishwas in his overarching presentation. So I just wanted to, I'll come back to that in a minute, but I just wanted to say, I think the issue of convergence was raised. And I'm glad, I didn't describe the National Biodiversity Mission in any detail, because if I were to start with the National Biodiversity Mission, and if I was to take the first component, that component would have included the presentations made by Amit and Jitendra. It would have been exactly the same, more or less the same thing. Secondly, I also wanted to mention that, of course, Dr. Vinod Mathur, who was the keynote speaker day before yesterday, is playing a critical role in the National Biodiversity Mission. The National Biodiversity Authority is the nodal agency. Ravi Chellam, who was the keynote speaker yesterday, is the director of the interim National Mission Secretariat that has been established in Bangalore. And thirdly, Vishwas, who has been the sort of instigator of all this series, is playing a very, very critical role. And I think I have thought of another designation today, that he's going to be the spiritual guru of the mission. And so I think we are all coming together. And I'm really happy to see this convergence. But again, Vivek, coming to your point, I think that good indicators, I have only 5 more seconds. The time is running out. I can't answer that in detail. But I think Vivek, Vishwas' presentation is very, very relevant to that question. And maybe offline, I can send you more detailed comments. I'm very happy to know about your role and the tremendous work you are doing. Beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir. We also have with us Dr. Anil Kumar Goyal, sir, and I request him to comment on the issue of governance of biodiversity law.
Thank you, Aparna. I like to comment on the talk given by Dr. Bawa and Dr. Vishwas. I largely agree with the comments made by Dr. Bawa and Dr. Vishwas that we have issues with the institutional constraints are there. There is lack of specialists, taxonomists. There are delay in getting permits. Many agencies are there, lack of coordination. But whenever we talk anything about health, infrastructure, biodiversity, education in the country, we should keep in mind somewhere that why this is all happening. Number one, population. Pressure of population in the country. Second one, we have limited resources, natural resources as well as financial resources. So whatever government has to do, government has to prioritize everything and then do justice. And our major, I'll say major constraint is financial resources. There are many things which can be done without financial resources, but major constraints are there. So we should keep in mind whenever we talk about all these things. But I'll just responding to Dr. Bawa's 2-3 things, because time is very little, I'll say about research. So in the research, there has been issue for the who are not fully Indian, that who companies which are having foreign participation, there has been issue of the research. The NBA and the ministry try to solve it by ensuring that they do not need prior approval for undertaking research. That is actually one of the major drawback flaws in the act. So that they were trying that research can be undertaken, but only when it is to be commercialized, then only you need approval. Second one, about democratization of management of forest at the ground level. Process started as early as in 1990 through joint forest management. That was democratization of management and administration of forest at the ground level. It has helped somewhere. It has borne fruit at many places, not helped at many places because there have been constraints of funding. And anywhere people, if they want to manage biodiversity, what is their first requirement? What I am going to get? So their basic needs are to be met first. And we should not be forgetting that issue of balancing conservation and development. And because there is a lot of pressure on forest land, so we cannot simply ignore development also. And we remember everything, everybody should remember that we all are enjoying the fruits of development. So these are my 2 points. The time is not there. Otherwise, I entirely agree. There are many things which can be done without funding also, but there are issues. There are issues of capacities. Why state biodiversity boards are lacking all these capacities? Because there are constraints of funding, constraints of putting people at right place, right people. There are no staff available. regulations are weak. Why all those are weak? People are not there to think about and do justice. So now I think things started moving. Regarding PBR also, People Biodiversity Register, I'll thank NGT. Because of that order, at least PBRs are being made. Those are not top quality, I know, but at least some paper document is there, and those need to be revisited. BMCs, these are there, this should have been there, and I think 17 years back, all local bodies should have created BMCs. Not done, because people don't have interest. Panchayats were to create, they were not made aware of all these things, so not happening. So I'll thank many things to courts and Supreme Court and NGTs. Because of their pressure, I think things started happening. But we need to improve quality. Thank you.
I just want to, I know we are running out of time. I want to clarify one important point I made. You're absolutely right, Mr. Goyal, in your assessment. My comment about permits had nothing to do with the National Biodiversity Act or the National Biodiversity Authority. I just referred to the very beautiful discussion we had day before yesterday. My comment related to when people go to work at specific sites, and I'm referring to the domestic researchers, the Indian researchers. They go and they want to pursue science, and they want to assist the department, assist everybody. It's a common heritage. And they face these difficulties. So I think the system has to listen. At some point, it has to listen. That's the only point I wanted to make. It has nothing to do with the National Biodiversity Authority. I was just referring to the beautiful discussion we had. But the permits for working at specific sites for researchers, Indian researchers at Indian institutions, are given by the state forest departments.
I think,
Thank you, sir. I have one question for Dr. Amit from Mr. Pitambar Humne. He is asking, sir, that now biodiversity and its documentation has become so important. Should it be a subject at undergraduate or postgraduate level so that we have more and more young researchers who can get interested in the conservation? What are your views on this?
Yes, definitely. I completely agree with him. And as we have seen in the past couple of months before meeting at NBA, we have decided to bring on all these things to the academic level, especially to the final year or last semester student. There should be an activity where all these students should get a credits over their exposure to field. In this way, we'll get anyhow some of the trained manpower, and we will get a ready-made interest in the nature and in biodiversity too. So I completely agree that this should be an activity, and I think whenever I get a chance to interact with higher authorities, I'll put it forward.
I have a question actually for Dr. Jitendra here. Jitendra, you have seen this being done in different places. So how do people mainstream biodiversity in other disciplines? That is my question.
So first, when I was working in India, I used to thought this is a developing world issue, that there is a lot of resistance of proper data management or use of technology or informatics for biodiversity conservation. But as I moved countries, I saw that's a universal problem actually, because one thing is that when we are growing up as graduates, undergraduates, or PhDs, we are never taught about how to use the technology for data management or for conservation. So this is never part of our, let's say, academic upbringing. So that's the lacking part. And also there is a lot of unawareness among senior scientists actually. And because of that, there is a resistance for not using it. And as I said in my presentation, and because of this unawareness, there is a bit of a sense of like it's like a burden. However, what I have also seen is with the continuous persistent follow-up, people tend to change the perception. right? And they try to follow. Okay, let's try this. When it is coming from the experts, like for example, with some recommendations on best practices in data management, there is a shift in that mentality. Like, okay, yes, we need to do this. We are in the 21st century. And also when you are applying for funding agencies, the funding agencies categorically mention these days, at least in Europe and US, that you should have a data management plan where you describe how are you going to collect your data, where are you going to store it, how are you going to share it. So they need all these details, and unless they have those details, they don't give you the funding. And also I know in United Kingdom, the funding agencies also go take through the follow-ups, like every 6 months or every 2 years, they do the follow-up of whatever was data management plan was submitted to them. They go back to the projects and ask, okay, this is what you mentioned in your project management, data management plan, what's happening, tell us. And if there is a deviation, then they really come down and say, oh no, we are going to stop your funding, get it corrected. So there is a lot of improvement from the funding agencies. And also the journals these days are pushing the authors to submit their data in repositories which are compatible or which are following the FAIR guidelines, like findable, accessibility, interoperability, and reuse, asking them to do a well-defined data sets, submission of well-defined data sets. And also there are some incentives coming in academics, or there are actually, like when you go to an interview, earlier it used to be like, okay, how many publications you have and how many impact, what is the impact factor? But now these days they also check how many data sets you have published, or how many applications or R code you have published. So there is a shift in the procedures now.
Just to add up to what Jitendra has said, I think there is a tangible shift happening in terms of data management now. And the idea that we spoke, and I first spoke about 20 years back, a concept of data paper, describing your data set through metadata and then publishing it into a data journal. Today, Nature has the data journal. There is a group of other Pentasoft publications has data journals in ecology and biodiversity. I think that will give scientists or researchers or managers a dual credit. First, to publish the description of the data set, and secondly, to publish the scientific research or analytical work that they do often. So I think that tangible shift is coming. Incidentally, the first data paper was published from BNHS, Bombay Natural History Society. And we thought there will be sea and flood of data papers from India. Unfortunately, that progress is not happening at the pace that it should happen. And these are sometimes few things that do take decades to kind of mature, but they will change the face of biodiversity science, definitely, in my opinion.
Thank you so much, sir. So I think what we need now is the whole nature of sharing data, which is actually quite natural to us. Like if we go to a village, we often get to hear so many things and people are ready to share knowledge. Nobody's holding on. Whereas in the scientific community of the past, there was an attitude towards holding on to your knowledge, which we see changing with the whole social networking and digitization coming in. So we are talking now about co-creation of knowledge in many ways. I think that is what is required to us. With this, we are almost near the end of our session and also end of the webinar series. For myself particularly, this has been really very, very encouraging experience, because we could hear so many thoughts and we could also give our thoughts out in an open manner. I hope Dr. Vishwas and Dr. Amit, that this is not a one-off event, because I see a lot of need and people do need to understand what is going on in our society. And biodiversity is our, daily bread and butter. So we need to look at biodiversity from different angles, and something like this should be on a continuous basis. So thank you again, and Vishwas sir, if you have last words about the webinar series, I hand it over to you.
Thank you, Aparna. I think this was a really nice experience to have people coming from different parts of the world and different remotest corner of the country to join together. 1,200 plus registrations itself signifies that there is a huge interest. And definitely, as you rightly said, this is not the one-off. In fact, just earlier this week, we were discussing to have a special session on women in biodiversity research. I think that gender equality needs to be uh, match up with something that we have to catch up with. My sincere thanks to all the keynote speakers, Vinod Mathur, uh, Ravi Chelam, and today especially Professor Kamal Bawa, and all other speakers who have spoken on this panel. Special thanks also to Anil Kumar Goyalji for being there on all 3 days. So that's something is something that I always looked at happening, and many others who are on this webinar series for all 3 days. The feedback form will be sent to others to give your feedback, and also to give us suggestion as to who should be the speakers, what should be the topics. And Kamal and I, we are talking about also with Ravi, that under the National Biodiversity Mission banner, to have some sort of continual activities of this kind, because the world is changing. We are not going to meet that frequently as we used to travel earlier. So technology, we could take the best possible use of technology. But thank you very much. And it has been an amazing, humbling experience for past 3 days. So thank you very much. Kamal, would you have to say something at the end? It would be good to have a last word from you.
The same. Thank you very much. There is a lot of convergence of ideas. There is I think, a lot of interest in collaboration, and we have a really common goal. I think we should not forget the goal. It is common. We all agree that it should be done, and I think we are coming together. And I have full confidence that we're going to be coming together even at a greater speed. And I think we have good days ahead from that point of view for biodiversity.
So thank you very much. Thanks, Aparna, for coordinating today's session as well. So have a safe stay. We always used to say safe journey back, but enjoyable and a safe journey, a safe stay at your own confined homes, and have a blissful time ahead. Good night, all of you, and rest of the good day for you, Kamal.
Good night, sir.
Good night.
Good night,
Bye.
sir.
Bye. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Good night to all.
Good.